Okay, welcome to this week's meeting. I'd like to go over some updates of what's going on in terms of the project, as well as covering some things that are going on within the crypto space that I feel indirectly relates to the project. So let me just pull up my notes here. So upcoming this week, I am planning on making a blog post relating to the off-chain EOS token design that we are using. I feel it's important that people understand this off-chain token design and why we had to go this way. But I also feel it's important that other people understand it, because when you put that information out there, this information might be useful to other projects who are trying to tackle similar problems, where it's not as feasible to implement these ideas in a smart contract on EOS due to limitations, but they clearly see the benefit of building on EOS. So these off-chain tokens are a good way of approaching that. So I'm gonna link in the chat. It's the exact same link that I had posted last week. It'll be included in the video recording as well. So I'm gonna put this here. And we have pretty much completed the phase 1 testing of the Atmos D token. So at this time, it is mainly using technology from Bitcoin and Ethereum. It's an off-chain token. At this time, it's obviously not pegged to Atmos. This is just an arbitrary test network, so some tokens were created out of thin air. And at this point in time, you can click on generate address right beside where it says private key, and that'll generate you a private key. It works exact same as how Bitcoin and Ethereum's private keys do. You'll see an address, should look very familiar, looks just like a Bitcoin address, and you can click faucet, and that'll give you 1.5 coins. And you can play around with transferring the coins to different addresses. And to run a node that fully validates this, you would basically just have to run the Novasphere DB software at this point in time, configured with the EOS plugin. So in time, we do hope that people run fully validating nodes, and of course, we expect that in the future, if Atmos D is listed on exchanges, they'll be running fully validated nodes. But the way this website sort of works is it works very similarly to how, let's say, an Electrum server works. So you can connect to, and this is generally what happens, you connect to someone else's Electrum server, and they provide you information about the state of the blockchain, and then you interact with the blockchain through them. You could also host your own Electrum server, and you can do that in this scenario as well. Just run your own Novasphere DB instance, and you would just change the endpoint that this page is using. So when you generate a transaction, it'll produce the raw transaction, and then you have two ways you can push that to EOS at this point in time. So you can push that via scatter, which will use your own account on EOS to push the transaction to the blockchain, or you can click push via service, which will actually broadcast the transaction to the blockchain via an account that we have provided. So this allows us to subsidize resources for people using Atmos D in this case. It covers the CPU and the net cost associated with it. And this is, of course, a renewable resource. So we don't really lose anything for doing this. We just have to make sure we're staking EOS to be able to provide this feature to people. And I mentioned before, other people can run services very similarly to this. And what they can do is they can charge a fee, which basically looks at the transaction that you're broadcasting to the EOS blockchain, and it makes sure that it's paying something to them. And as long as you're paying some small fee to them that they agree to, then they will broadcast it to the chain for you. So in practice, the currency Atmos D can be feeless if you broadcast transactions yourself to the chain, or you can go through someone else or some sort of service, and then they might charge you a small fee to do that on your behalf. So this allows us to borrow from sort of the feeless aspect that EOS has in terms of how its resources work. So Our next step going forward is not immediately working on phase 2 of Atmos D, which is starting to implement the Monero side of things. I should actually clarify what I mean by at this point in time it uses the same tech that Bitcoin and Ethereum uses. So it's using the same cryptography scheme that Bitcoin uses, which is ECDSA, and it's using an account system like the way Ethereum uses. So what I mean by that is in Bitcoin, when you spend a transaction, you've created an output to wherever you spent the transaction. And when somebody goes to spend what you sent them, they have to reference the previous transaction. Whereas on Ethereum, you're more so saying, "Hey, I want to spend coins from this particular address," instead of referencing a past transaction that's occurred. So very slight difference, but so that's currently how phase 1 of this works, and phase 2 will be when we start to look to implement sort of the Monero features that really make Monero shine in terms of privacy, such as ring signatures and confidential transactions and so forth. And so we're heavily following what's going on in Monero in terms of their research as well. So in terms of our next steps going forward, because I just said that we're not immediately going to be starting on phase 2, is we need to start the swap, of course, to the EOS token. And then what we need to start working on is, I feel at this point in time, it's more important to start working on the bridge mechanism between Atmos and Atmos D, which introduces sort of a staking mechanism to Atmos on EOS. And the reason I feel this is very important is because of an article that recently just came out. So I'm going to link that article in the chat, and so article will also be referenced in the video that's posted. And I'm going to highlight a particular quote in the chat, and I'll paraphrase it verbally as well. So let me just paste this here. So recently, Shapeshift has announced that they are starting a membership program, and to participate in their membership program, you have to go through a KYC AML process. And while at this time it's not mandatory, they've stated that it will become mandatory very soon. And I know for a lot of people that have been in crypto early on, Shapeshift has always been a really go-to and really easy way to move between different currency pairs without actually having an account on an exchange. And more importantly, it was one of the best ways that you could easily move a coin into Monero and then move Monero back into some other coin. And this would sort of help de-link a trace between a certain coin, and added to your privacy. It added privacy that a lot of coins were lacking because they could sort of piggyback on Monero through Shapeshift. And this is no longer the case because when KYC is mandatory, the privacy that Monero was giving you is sort of harmed by this, especially if you're using Shapeshift. And obviously, Monero privacy is also harmed in terms of when you're buying it from an exchange and transferring it out. So I think it's really important that we get the bridge aspect down, because we can see that the reason that Shapeshift has done this is it's clear that given the type of person that Eric Voorhees is, he's not doing this because he wants to. He comes from a very libertarian background, so I can tell that privacy is a very important aspect to him. And so it's clear that this has to do with changing regulation and the volume that Shapeshift's processing. So this could become a real problem for us later on if we're still using a centralized bridge mechanism to switch between Atmos and Atmos D, because we could encounter the very same scenario where we're forced to collect KYC from people, and that's the last thing we really want to do. So this is why it's really important for us to have a decentralized mechanism to move back and forth between the two, and not rely too heavily on the centralized solution, and not let the centralized solution exist for longer than it needs to. So I think this is a very crucial step going forward. So I think that covers some of the main things that I wanted to go over in terms of what's going on in terms of Atmos D. And then in terms of the forum and some video stuff, you can expect some pretty cool updates to come later in the next week or two relating to the video stuff. So that has to do with the stuff I mentioned before, like tagging and being able to see something from an interface more similar to, let's say, how DTube looks or a traditional streaming site. So that's coming in the next very short time frame. So if any of you guys have any questions, feel free to ask now. So the Hiveline asks, is asking about the swap on the EOS blockchain. Yeah, so I mentioned that we're going to be starting this very soon, but I have also mentioned in previous meetups that there isn't a huge rush for people to swap right away. And after the swap is available, we'll be reaching out to the dexes that we know of on EOS. So the swap should be available fairly soon because it's pretty much one of the major steps that we need going forward as phase 1 of the Atmos D token is now completed. So very soon is what I'd have to say this week. User profiles on the forum will also be launching this week, either on Tuesday or Wednesday, and then I will collect some feedback from features that people would like to see in terms of the forum, in terms of the user profiles, and then we can continue to build that out, and then I can update the Trello accordingly with things that we consider to be important. So that was just answering a question of what Fixed asked, which was, where is the status of user profiles on the forums? I guess maybe one thing I should cover, as well as the questions if you guys have any more, is how staking will work on EOS, because you will be able to stake on EOS at some point, and this staking will heavily have to do with with a few aspects of the chain in terms of how the decentralized bridge between Atmos and Atmos D will work. And so the way I see staking working, just to cover how it relates back to Atmos and Atmos D, rather than going through a centralized mechanism, the way it would work is when you want Atmos D, you would be sending Atmos to this contract, and this contract would essentially act as a decentralized escrow. And you would tell the contract, hey, here's where I want my Atmos D sent to, and those running Novasphere DB nodes would see that this transaction has occurred on the EOS blockchain, and so they would be in consensus to say, okay, so this person should now have this amount of Atmos D. And so going from Atmos to Atmos D is very easy programmatically. Likewise, Bitcoin has this exact same scenario where if you want to go from Bitcoin to a sidechain, it's not a difficult thing to implement in terms of how that works. Where the difficulty then arises is when you want to go from, in terms of Bitcoin, the sidechain back to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin doesn't know anything about that sidechain. So how do you get, these coins released out of escrow? So in this case, the way this works is the person will destroy the Atmos D by sending them to something like a burn address or something similar to that. And then what will happen is there's another step involved, which is they then make another transaction on EOS claiming for that burn transaction that says, hey, I just burned these Atmos D, so now I want my Atmos, I want the equivalent amount of Atmos released from the escrow contract back to me. And then those validating the Atmos D chain, the Novasphere DB, So those people are the people that are staking. Will see this transaction, and essentially they vote on it. And this happens all, of course, automatically just by running the software. And they vote whether this is a valid request or whether it's invalid. And if enough people that are staking, if enough of a weight approves of it, then the Atmos is then released from the escrow contract back to that person. So this allows us to move between Atmos and Atmos D in a decentralized way instead of relying on a centralized mechanism. So if you guys have any other questions, we can go over that. Otherwise, it was a fairly short update that I had to give, which was mainly focused around what was going on in terms of Atmos D and in regards to the upcoming swap. So I'll give a bit of time just in case you guys have any other questions. So Fix asked how long will the fully decentralized mechanism take to come online. As soon as the swap is completed, or when I say completed, I mean like once it's started and people can start claiming their Atmos over to the EOS chain. I think working on the bridge mechanism is my next immediate priority. So it's hard for me to say like how long that time frame is going to be, but I don't think it's going to be a very long time frame. I think you probably need a little bit of time to actually test everything and make sure it works, and then we can then sort of push that to live. So I would expect that the decentralized bridge mechanism would actually be available. I would say by December at latest, but I think we'll get it way sooner than that. The main thing that we need there is to ensure security of how that all works. So the contract doesn't, we don't end up in a scenario where the contract has given out funds it's not supposed to, which is essentially what happened in the DAO incident. So as soon as just to give a more concise answer on that, as soon as we've started working on it, I'll try to give better updates and better coverage as in terms of what's going on in terms of building that bridge mechanism. And the nice part about it is once we have it built, other projects that look to implement something like an off-chain token can use that exact same system. So just waiting a sec here. I see someone else typing in the chat. So the Hiveblind asks, since we brought up the DAO, and we have discussed previously in the project that something similar to that will be available for Atmos, has anything changed on that front? I would say no. It's pretty much still a plan. So the way that would work is once you have the decentralized mechanism for um, moving between Atmos and Atmos D, previously we had talked about having an inflationary policy for funding certain things, like funding a subsidiary for those who are producing blocks if we had our own blockchain, as well as for funding the DAO. But now that we've been aiming towards a fixed supply model, the way I think this can work is since there's going to be fees from people moving back uh, from between Atmos and Atmos D, and the fee associated with that is then paid to the people staking. A part of that fee can also go to a contract for related to the DAO, and then people can vote on that contract in terms of how to release funds from it and what sort of proposals they would like to see that funding go towards. So it's hard to say how well this will work in the very short term, because obviously in the very short term there's not going to be a high volume of transactions going back and forth between Atmos and Atmos D, so the rewards associated with staking and what's would be going into the DAO contract would be very small. But I think over time the value of what's in that contract should increase. The biggest thing that I think I have to worry about, and I think the community has to worry about, but I feel that this can be combated with educating people and keeping them informed, is that BitShares ran into a similar problem, which was when they had their worker proposal system. Even though people would put forth good worker proposals, the market was very young at this point in time, so there wasn't a whole lot of money to go around. But more importantly, people who were stakeholders of BitShares, they did not want to vote on these worker proposals, even if they thought it was a good idea, because they essentially saw it as diluting themselves. Because prior to agreeing to release funds from the contract, essentially these are quote quote burned funds, right? So by choosing to release them in a worker proposal, you're essentially granting these funds to someone who you know is inevitably going to sell some of it onto the market so that they can have funding for their project. So what ended up happening in BitShares, and this is part of the reason that Dan left BitShares, is that people would not fund what he was doing in this case. So luckily, in terms of Novosphere, we don't need funding from this contract. But I think as long as people understand the concept that in order to make money, you need to spend money, they can understand that funding good proposals is an optimal case instead of trying to strive for just a sliver of extra scarcity. So the Hivemind asks, those transaction fees, Atmos and Atmos D, are the only thing that's going into staking because the total supply is 100 million. Is that correct? And the answer to that is yes, that's entirely correct. At this point in time, we're aiming for a fixed supply model, so there should not be any funds being created. So funds would be paid to anything that's paid to the stakers is what is coming from the fees. So the more volume there is on the network in terms of transactions between Atmos and Atmos D over time, stakers will be able to earn more. And a really nice part about using the EOS blockchain is how fast it is. And as an example, if you use the page I linked before, which has the phase 1 Atmos, and you claim from the faucet, you should see it updates fairly quickly in terms of showing you your balance and being able to spend that balance. So one of the things that we heavily benefit from with off-chain tokens is the speed of the EOS blockchain, which means the off-chain token is pretty much as fast as EOS itself. Oh, okay. So the Hiveline mentions there was an attack today. Did I discuss that over the meeting? So no, I didn't bring this up, but now that you've mentioned it, I can go over it. So what happened was an attacker managed to connect to the database behind EOS Form. So if you click settings, you'll see a API endpoint called db.novasphere.io. And they did not gain access to the server or anything like that, so nothing happened in that. They only got access to the same data set that everyone would have if they were running Novasphere DB. And what they did was they made a backup of it, and they left a comment in the database essentially saying, "Hey, we dropped your data. Pay us. I think it was 0.6 bitcoins, and we'll give it back to you." And if this person had just taken the amount of time to read the disclaimer on the side of EOS Form as to how it works, they would know that this information is information that everyone should have, and that can easily be restored just by rerunning the Novasphere DB software. So in turns, the harm done was pretty negligible, and the security exploit that they used has been resolved, and really no harm was done as no what's the word I'm looking for here? No dangerous information was being stored, since it's the same information that everyone would have if they ran Novasphere DB themselves. And all that information, of course, comes from the EOS blockchain itself. I think it's a good point to bring up that, if someone took the time to actually conduct this attack, it at least shows that they thought it was valuable, and they thought it was, worth doing. So I think it means that we're definitely going in the right direction in terms of the project if we can draw attraction that makes people want to attack the project. On the other hand, I thought I'd just mention that if this person actually had just reached out to me and mentioned it, even though it was a non-critical bug, I would have definitely offered them a bounty for just pointing it out. But since they instead tried to go the ransom route, they're not going to get anything from it. Yeah, so at this point in time, we haven't done a lot of outreach on the forum. We haven't really done a lot of marketing or promotion or any of that sort of thing. And I think once we have a little bit more features on the forum, specifically, like I've been saying for a while now, the moderation feature so that spam can be policed and we can better address that, it'll be a lot more user-friendly for people to start using the forum, and that'll be a good time to really start the outreach. I think as long as if we stick to initially the EOS roots, and especially with the integration we have planned with Evo, that we can draw some attraction to people using it. After all, even though I personally don't feel that, for example, a platform like Memo.Cash is going to be ever widespread used, a lot of the Bitcoin Cash community has started using it. And I think that I'm going to be adopting a similar mindset in terms of when I start posting updates, as opposed to just posting them on Medium, I'm going to be posting them on the forum itself as well. So it's not just him. He's working with a team of people, and they are working on an EOS wallet that has dApps directly integrated in with the wallet. So EOS Form will be one of the dApps that are directly integrated into the wallet. So you'll be able to use EOS Form from the wallet he's working on, or him and his team are working on. So if anyone has any other questions, we can go over that. Otherwise, I think that's about it. So anyone can start their. Okay, so Mr. Wicks asked, do you see the possibility of collaborating with other organizations within your forum as a subform or fork? Like Reddit, anyone is free to come in and to create a sub and to start using that sub. And really, subs aren't created. It's more like you just have to post in them. Pretty much every sub that could possibly exist already exists. So, for example, if you had a community that you wanted to start, you would just go to that particular subname and you could start posting in it. And if you wanted to allow people from the anonymous account to post in it, you would just need to prefix that sub with anon. So just to give a quick example that I'll put in the chat, and it can also be linked in the video. Just give me one moment here. So here are two examples. You could go to either of those links and just start posting in that sub right now. Nobody has to actually create it. So if any other organization wants to start using the forum or wants to help start contributing in terms of helping with the code or helping with ideas, they're free to create a pull request on GitHub and start helping out. Or reach out to me directly, and I'd love to talk to them. Okay, so I think that's about it for this meeting. Thanks for coming out, guys. The recording should be up in a bit. And I'll see you guys again next week. Thank you.